guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. If you can hear any background noise in today's video, ambulances, people, dogs, rain, I do apologize. I know in the last video there were a lot of ambulances. That again is something that I cannot help. I can't help people, I can't help dogs, and it is also storming outside. Like, it is disgusting out right now. I think it's pretty warm, but like it's so gray and dreary, and honestly is just making me want to go to bed. But anyways, the case that we're going to be discussing today is one that is extremely vile and honestly disgusting. It's really violent and honestly just makes my skin crawl. It takes a certain kind of case to physically make me want to throw up while I'm doing research for some of these cases, but this is one of those cases. So if that isn't something that you think you can handle, please just click out of today's video. So with that all being said, let's get right into it. As you can see by the title of today's video, we are going to be discussing another cult, and the cult that we are going to be discussing today is known as the Anthill Kids cult. Again, just before we get into today's video, I do just need to remind you guys, this case is absolutely sickening. It involves children, it involves extremely violent acts, so if you're going to watch this video, just be prepared for that. Roch Thériault was born on May 16th, 1947 in Saguenay, Quebec, Canada. He was said to be a very intelligent child who was good at school, and he was pretty popular when he did attend school. However, even with his good grades and everything that was going well for him while he was in school, Roch still ended up dropping out in the 7th grade. And with all of that extra time on his hand, he started to study the Old Testament of the Bible. And around this time, when Roch was so young, is when he started to kind of dip into the thought that, you know, like doomsday, like he thought that doomsday was coming. I really would like to give a little bit more detail about Roch's childhood and how his life was when he was growing up. However, there isn't much about it whatsoever online. I was digging and digging, but a lot of the information didn't add up or line up, and it was like really contradicting depending on the articles. So I don't really know much about his childhood life. However, Roch himself, as well as people who knew his family, do say that they believe that Roch's household while he was growing up was an abusive one, and Roch did say that his father was abusive. So we don't know that for a fact. Obviously, people can just say that or assume that, but that is something that was stated. But besides that, again, we don't really know much about his household growing up. In 1967, Roch would go on to marry his first wife, Francine, at the young age of 21. The two of them would go on to have 2 children, and you may find this to be a little bit alarming, but again, Roch goes on to become a cult leader, and as we know, with studying cults, these people are usually well liked, and Roch was not an exception. People really liked him. He was allegedly well liked by women. He was just an overall, you know, easy come, easy go kind of dude. People thought he was inspiring and nice and all of those things that cult leaders usually are. But anyways, at this time, Roch was supporting his wife and his 2 children by selling carved wood. So I guess like wood pieces that he would make and then sell to people. By this time, it was the early 70s, and a lot of the people in Roch's life would say that he was seemingly a very odd person. This is when he started to seem like he thought that his purpose on earth was to save people from this like end of the world that was coming. He thought that an apocalypse was coming, and he thought that he was put on the earth to save people from this apocalypse. And people in his life started to notice this, but they said that it didn't get too severe until Roch's health started declining. Roch had severe stomach ulcers, and he went on to have several surgeries to remove these stomach ulcers. The surgeries, however, ended up failing, and because of this, Roch had a really big problem with trusting medical professionals. He did not trust them at all anymore, and he started to go on to really educate himself almost obsessively, about medical things, surgeries, and things along those lines. And this is when he started to drink and use drugs very, very heavily, which I'm assuming were to kind of cope with the pain that he was going through because of these stomach ulcers. After the substance abuse problem really started to kick in, that is when Roch became aggressively mean to his wife, Francine. Then Francine found out that Roch was having an affair, and this is when she was just like, I'm not doing this, and the two of them got a divorce. And Roch then went on to marry his second wife, Giselle, which was actually the woman that he was having an affair with. And so honestly, he was just really all over the board at this place. He was being extremely unpredictable and everything was all over the place. So Roch was suffering with a substance abuse issue, but he then went on to become a devout Seventh-day Adventist, and he really practiced the church's holistic beliefs, which meant that you were to live a life free of alcohol, drugs, and you weren't even really allowed to eat junk food. Like, everything about this kind of beliefs was to live a very healthy lifestyle. So he wasn't indulging anymore in alcohol, drugs, or junk food. However, Roch wouldn't last very long in the Seventh-day Adventist church because it seemed as if he was trying to gain leadership of the church. So again, Roch was asked to leave the church, but at this time he had already gained a little bit of a following from some of the members of the church who really looked up to him, and so he took these people with him when he left that church, and they kind of joined his little church that he had going on. His goal at this time was to create a community where everybody could live freely, everybody could live as equals, and at first that sounds very, very good, just like the start of most cults. But anyways, that was his goal. That's what he was telling the people that were following him, that was what his goal was. And he would tell anybody who could listen to him that that is what he wanted to do. He was a messenger of God, and that he believed that he had the power to heal people. Roch was so convincing saying that he could heal people that he even got some of the members of the Seventh-day Adventist church, while he was still a part of that church, to allow him to try and heal them whatever they were going through. He had convinced a woman by the name of Carol Dean, after he was no longer a part of the Seventh-day Adventist church and after he had already started his own kind of church, that he could cure her from cancer. He told her that she needed to stop getting any medical treatment, she needed to stop visiting the hospital, she needed to drink lots of grape juice, and she needed to eat an organic, healthy diet, and that if she did this, she would be completely healed. Unfortunately and devastatingly, this woman ended up passing away, but this didn't raise any alarms for Roch's followers. He told them that he was going to bring her back to life after she had passed, but God had told him that it was Carol's time and he couldn't bring her back. And his followers continued to believe him, even with this crazy story. At this time is when Roch started to convince his followers that they needed to give up their families, their jobs, school, anything that makes your life yours. Roch had convinced his followers to completely give up. He moved his followers to a commune in Ste. Marie, Quebec, and this is where he told them that they could live freely and they could listen to him preach on a daily basis. And this is where he really started to preach that in February of 1979, God would come down, and when he did, that would ultimately be the end of the world. On the commune in Ste. Marie, Quebec, there were 13 members of the cult who were adults, majority of which were women, and 10 members of the cult which were children. Something to keep in mind here is during this all, Roch was still married to his second wife, Giselle, and she was a member of the cult. Also, Roch was already being watched by police because he was giving out detrimental medical advice to random people, and obviously that would catch people's attention, but also asking people and convincing people to leave their families. Obviously family members and stuff were calling police being like, what is going on? So the police already knew who he was pretty much right off the bat, right off the start of this cult that he created. Roch thought because the world was going to be ending soon in his mind that his group needed to live somewhere very secluded and off-grid. I also think the fact that Roch knew that the police kind of knew who he was probably played a little bit of a part in this. But after he decided this, he picked up his commune and he decided to move them to a very secluded area in what is called the Eternal Mountain in St. Jugues, Quebec. I believe it's St. Jugues. I could be saying that completely wrong. I will try and put the word on the screen so that you guys can see it, because I don't know how my pronunciation is with that. But this was a very, very secluded area where the commune was going to be rebuilt. Once they got there, Roch started to instruct the members of his cult to start building these like cabin areas where they would live. They needed to find food to feed the other members as well as Roch himself. And while the members of the cult were going around, you know, building these cabins and getting the food and kind of setting up this community for them, Roch just sat there doing absolutely nothing to help, just watching. He wasn't helping do absolutely anything. And while he was sitting on his butt doing absolutely nothing, watching the members of his church running around building and looking for food and creating this camp for them to live on, Roch thought that they all looked like ants. And that is when he came up with the name the Anthill Kids. When I did my last cult video, which was quite a while now, I think it was the Children of God cult, I talked about in that video how it is a very strong manipulation tactic to make people extremely exhausted and really deprive them of sleep and food and things like that, because it tricks your brain into not being able to think logically. Obviously, when you're exhausted, when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, anything like that really affects the way your brain works. That's just common knowledge. And this is when Roch really started to use this manipulation tactic, because the members of the cult were so busy building this camp all the time on lack of sleep and lack of food that this is when their brains really just, I guess, like stopped working logically, and they were very easily manipulated, unfortunately. This is so sad, but Roch, after this was going on, I guess these people were just so tired and ready for this life where they were going to be living freely. They were promised that they were going to be living freely and equally, and they would never have to worry about anything. And once they got all of this camp set up, that is when he started to make every single member of the cult wear the exact same, almost like a uniform, the exact same outfit. He would ration their food, so they were only allowed to eat little bits here and there, and anything they were allowed to eat had to be approved by Roch. And he even went as far to change each and every member of the Anthill Kids' names, completely stripping them of their identity. He told the members of the Anthill Kids that he was the reincarnation of Moses, and he also convinced all of the members that he needed to have multiple wives. So he started to sleep with every single one of the women in the cult. He married every single one of the women in the cult. Married, I don't think it was legal. And he went on to get every single one of these women pregnant. And he ended up having 20 children with the women from the cult. Roch also began to drink extremely heavily, but none of the other members of the cult were allowed to drink, you know, eat unhealthy, use drugs, anything like that, which he brought with him from the church, the Seventh-day Adventist that he was already a part of. But obviously Roch is not connected to that church at all. That was just something that he used as kind of like a crossover. But yeah, so that is something that I see really a lot in other cults that I've studied too. A lot of the leaders don't want the members drinking, but they drink heavily, they use drugs, you know, anything like that. It's just sickening. But yeah, at this time, Roch already had full control over all of the members of the Anthill Kids. And so in February of 1979, when Roch told them that the world was going to end, it came and it went. And obviously some of the members of the cult were like, what the heck? You said the world was going to end and it didn't end. And Roch explained this away by saying that God's time and our time was completely different and there was no way of lining them up correctly. And that God had also told him that he needed more followers. And that is how he kind of, I guess, led into sleeping with all of the women of the cult and getting them all pregnant. I kind of went in a weird order there because that happened first, then when he started sleeping with all of the women in the cult. But you kind of get the gist of where this is going here with this. Remember how we talked about earlier in the video that Roch had this hate on for medical professionals and that he thought that he was a healer? He really convinced the members of the Anthill Kids of this information, and this is when he started to perform surgeries without any medical education or anything like that on the members of the church or the cult or whatever you want to call it. In 1981, a 2-year-old boy by the name of Samuel was having trouble urinating, and he was a member of the cult. In order to fix this young boy's urinating problem, Roch decided to perform an operation. And before I move on to this, I should say that this is so sickening, it makes my skin crawl. But in order to fix this young boy's urinating problem, Roch decided to slice open this child's genitals. Samuel was in so much pain that he screamed and screamed and screamed and would not stop, obviously. And this was extremely irritating to Roch. And so because of this, he ordered one of the other cult members, who I should say was said to be mentally handicapped, but this man's name was Guy Vier. And he was instructed by Roch to make the child be quiet, and so Guy Vier beat this baby to death. In order to conceal Samuel's death, his body was burnt, and as a punishment for killing the young boy, Vier was castrated by Roch, and then the other members of the cult were instructed to tell anybody who asked that Vier was trampled by horses. But eventually the truth of what happened did end up coming out, and because of this, the commune was raided by police. The body of the 2-year-old boy was discovered by police, and Roch and 8 other members of the cult were arrested and charged with criminal negligence and inflicting bodily harm. However, they ended up being released very, very quickly. Once released from prison, Roch and his followers decided to move to Burnt River, Ontario. There were now 40 members of the Anthill Kids, 20 of which were the children of the cult, who were all fathered by Roch himself. While living in Burnt River, Ontario, the cult made money by making and selling maple syrup. They made smoked fish and just like handcrafted goods, and they would sell them, and that is how they made money to support each other and the cult, and basically just Roch. And once the cult moved to Ontario, the abuse would become much, much worse. At this point, the members of the cult were not even allowed to communicate with one another without Roch's supervision. Like, what? How do you even live like that? The abuse at this time was so disgusting and intense. Roch would urinate and poo on the members of the cult. He would hit them with hammers. He would suspend them from the ceiling as a form of punishment and make the other members of the cult rip out their leg hairs and their body hairs one by one. This wasn't even all of what he was doing, but he was just going to such extremes with the abuse and the punishments. It is absolutely disgusting. And not even the children were safe from these violent acts. I don't want to go too deeply into this because this case is already disgusting and honestly pretty traumatizing to think about at all. But I do just want to brush the surface. He was said to be sexually abusing a lot of the children, or all of the children in the cult. And just like with the adult members, how he would get the other members involved in beating them and abusing them, he would get the other children involved in abusing other children. He would nail them to trees and boards and get the other children to throw rocks at them, which is just heartbreaking and disgusting. Oh my goodness. And after performing these violent acts and doing all of this absolutely disgusting and beyond abusive stuff, Roch would say that the next day, or it was said that the next day, that Roch would often break down crying, saying that he didn't want to do this anymore and pleading with God to stop using him as a slave to do all of these abusive and horrible things. Which, I'm not a doctor, but that suggests to me that this man was probably extremely mentally ill. He would hold these things called gladiator fights, which are exactly what they sound like. He would put 2 members of the cult in like this ring, and he would make them fight until Roch decided that was enough and called it off. I just want to stress to you guys how bad a lot of this abuse was. He would make the members smash their own legs with sledgehammers to prove their devotion to Roch. He would just get other members to shoot other members in the shoulder, like all of this absolutely horrible, horrible stuff. And obviously at this point, a lot of the members were deciding that they wanted to leave. And when they voiced these opinions, that is when a lot of this abuse would start taking place. They were pretty much completely trapped there. In 1987, one of the adult female members of the cult decided that enough was enough, and even though this was happening to her, she did not want this to happen to anybody else, and she was going to go to any extreme to make this stop. And so, in order to bring an end to this, she left her 2-month-old baby outside in the freezing cold to freeze to death. And eventually this baby's body was discovered, and this did help a lot because this is when a serious investigation was started into the Anthill Kids Church. This time, Roch had already gotten the Anthill Kids Church verified as a church, and so because of religious laws in Canada, the police had to go with severe caution while going about investigating the church itself. But they were able to investigate the welfare of the children, and within doing this, they were able to remove all of the children from the commune, leaving back at the commune Roch and 10 adults, 8 women and 2 men. Once the children were removed from the property, that is when Roch stopped seeming so remorseful. He was already bad enough when the children were on the property, but he would have those days where he would break down crying and feeling bad about it. But once the children were off the property, he didn't seem to care at all, and he started severely abusing the adults. He castrated one of the men by tying a rubber band around his genitals, and he made this man wear this around, and it was so tight that eventually the man's genitals became infected, and he left the band there until his penis fell off. And while he was inflicting all of this absolutely terrible pain and torture onto the adults, he was saying that he was instructed to do so by God. And if that last one about the man being castrated by the rubber band wasn't enough, the next 2 that I'm going to share with you while researching, I quite literally almost vomited like multiple times, so just be prepared. In September of 1988, a female member of the cult by the name of Salone Bullard started to complain of a stomach upset. That is when Roch made her get onto the kitchen table and started violently punching her in the stomach. And this is so bad, you guys. He then inserted a tube into her rectum, and that is when he started to perform what he described as an enema using molasses and olive oil. And if that wasn't bad enough for this poor woman, he then made an incision in her side, stuck his bare hand inside of her, and pulled out her intestines. He removed a piece of her intestines using his bare hands and then shoved them back inside her. She was then left to sit in what I can only imagine as unimaginable pain until she ended up passing away the next day, from what can only be speculated would be because there was probably digestive chemicals that leaked into her abdomen. He then told the remaining members of the cult that he was going to bring Salone back to life. He instructed them to remove her uterus, and he told them to saw off a small part of her skull so that he could ejaculate into her brain and that this would bring her back to life. However, when this didn't work, he then ordered the members to bury her body on the commune. But before he allowed the members to bury her, he removed one of her ribs and he wore it around his neck in this like leather type casing. In November of 1988, another female member of the cult by the name of Gabrielle Laville, was complaining of a toothache. That is when Roch decided that he was going to rip out several of this woman's teeth using pliers. After this was done later that night, he chased this woman around using a knife and he cut out one of the tendons in her hand. In July of 1888, Gabrielle made the mistake of complaining about a stiff hand, And this is when Roch decided to amputate her entire arm. He cut off her hand first and then cut off her arm and left her on the kitchen table overnight until he decided to stitch up the wound the following morning. On August 16th, 1988, Gabrielle managed to escape and she got to a hospital in Toronto where she told the entire story of the horrors that took place in the Anthill kids cult. Roch Thériault was arrested and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of unbodily harm, and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Another member of the cult led police to the body of Salone, and then Roch pleaded guilty to the 2nd-degree murder and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but was stabbed to death by a cellmate in 2011. I definitely think that this is one of the most disturbing cases I have ever come across. This is definitely one of the sickest cults I have ever done any research on. My heart sincerely goes out to the families and loved ones of any of the people who lost their lives or went through the trauma of being a part of this man's sick and twisted game. I cannot believe that somebody this sick and twisted is even... Like, I can't even believe that somebody was out there doing these things to people. This is just one of the worst cases I have ever come across. But guys, that is going to bring us to the end of today's video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.